I ran to the hospital to see my husband in intensive care. Suddenly, a nurse leaned in close and whispered, "Hide now." Trust me, before I could respond, she pushed me into the room next door. Through the crack in the door, I watched as a woman walked into my husband's room. What I heard next made my blood run cold. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Let me tell you how a 5-year marriage, a multi-million-dollar empire, and everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down in a single afternoon. But first, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone calls me Maggie. At 64, I've built something most people only dream of, a real estate empire worth $37 million. Not bad for a girl from small-town Wyoming who started with nothing but determination and a knack for spotting potential where others saw problems. That Tuesday afternoon, I was rushing through Denver General's sterile corridors, my heels clicking against the polished floors like a countdown to disaster. Richard had been in the ICU for 3 days. After what doctors called a severe cardiac episode, 3 long days of watching my husband of 5 years fight for his life. Or so I thought. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd made my fortune restoring broken down buildings. Yet my own marriage was apparently beyond repair. Still, as I hurried toward room 314, I believed I was a devoted wife racing to her beloved husband's bedside. Mrs. Thompson, a young nurse with tired eyes and brown hair pulled into a bun, stepped in front of me. Her badge read Sarah Collins, RN. "I need to speak with you privately. Is Richard worse?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The doctor said he was stable this morning." Sarah glanced around nervously, then gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Hide now. Trust me." Before I could protest, she shoved me into the small supply room next to Richard's ICU room. Through the narrow crack in the door, I saw a stunning young woman glide inside. She had honey blonde hair, flawless makeup despite it being 3 in the afternoon, and legs that seemed endless. Her red dress probably cost more than most people's rent. "Trust me, I know expensive when I see it." The woman approached Richard's bed like she belonged there. That's when my supposedly unconscious husband spoke in a clear, steady voice I hadn't heard in days. "Sophia, darling, you shouldn't be here during visiting hours." My world tilted. Sophia? Who the hell was Sophia? I couldn't wait any longer, she purred, her voice dripping with that breathy sweetness that always made me want to roll my eyes. "The lawyers confirmed everything. Once the transfer papers are signed, all her assets will be in your name only." I gripped the doorframe so hard I thought it might snap. "And the hospital records?" Richard asked, sounding nothing like a man who'd nearly died. "Perfect," she said smoothly. "Dr. Martinez was very accommodating once we explained the situation. Your recovery will be miraculous, but will require extended care. Maggie will be so focused on taking care of you, she won't notice the business transfers until it's too late." My husband chuckled. $37 million, he said. "And she'll hand it over gladly to make sure I get the best care." "What about the prenup?" Sophia asked. "What prenup?" Richard's voice was smug. "I made sure we never signed one." "Too romantic," I told her. "True love doesn't need legal protection." I remembered that conversation 5 years ago. I'd been the one to suggest a prenup. I already owned several profitable properties and wanted to protect my assets. But Richard had looked so wounded, so hurt by the suggestion, that I'd dropped it. "True love," he'd said, just like he was saying to her now. "So once you're recovered," Sophia continued, "you'll have access to everything: the properties, the business accounts, the investment portfolio." And with her signature on the medical proxy forms, she smiled. "I can make decisions about her care when she inevitably has her own accident." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "An accident?" I heard Sophia's voice soften just a touch of concern. "Nothing dramatic," Richard replied. "But wives who've lost their fortunes to medical expenses often become depressed, suicidal even. Very sad, really. They were planning to kill me." I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. 5 years of marriage, and this man was casually discussing my murder with his 20-something mistress. "When do we move forward?" Sophia asked. "Next week," Richard replied. "She's already signed the initial medical forms giving me financial authority during my recovery. The lawyer will bring the business transfer documents Thursday. Once those are signed, we wait 3 months for everything to process." Then he made a sound I can only describe as gleeful. "I can't wait to get out of this dreary city," Sophia said. "The house in Malibu will be perfect for us." My house in Malibu, the one I'd bought as a surprise for our 5th anniversary. Sarah Collins appeared beside me so quietly I nearly jumped out of my skin. She pressed a finger to her lips and motioned for me to follow her. We slipped out through a back corridor I hadn't even known existed. Sarah led me into a small break room at the end of the hall and locked the door behind us. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that," she said softly. I sank into a plastic chair. my legs suddenly unable to hold me. How long have you known? 2 weeks, she said. I've been his nurse since he was admitted. And that woman has been here every day. At first, I thought she was a daughter or something. But then I started noticing things. What things? I asked. The way they touched each other. The conversations they had when they thought no one was listening. And yesterday, I accidentally saw some documents. She brought legal papers with your name on them. I looked at this young nurse, really looked at her for the first time. She had kind eyes, but there were tired lines around them. The kind that belonged to someone who seemed too much hardship for her age. Why are you helping me? I asked. Sarah hesitated. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust. And because. She paused as if weighing her words. Because I have a son. And if something happened to me, I'd want someone to look out for him. This is wrong, Mrs. Thompson. What they're planning, it's evil. We sat in silence for a moment while I tried to process everything I'd just heard. What do you think I should do? I finally asked. Sarah smiled. And for the first time since I'd stepped foot in that hospital, I felt like someone was actually on my side. I think, she said slowly, that your husband and his girlfriend are about to discover they've underestimated the wrong woman. I drove home in a daze, Sarah's words echoing in my mind. The woman they thought they were dealing with was the grieving wife who'd spent 3 days crying at her husband's bedside. But that woman had died in that supply room. The woman driving through Denver's afternoon traffic was someone else entirely, someone considerably more dangerous. My house sat on 3 acres in Cherry Hills Village, the kind of property that makes real estate agents weep with joy. I'd bought it 15 years ago when it was a dated 1970s ranch, and turned it into something worthy of Architectural Digest. Richard always took credit for the vision, naturally, but every detail from the imported marble to the custom lighting had been my idea. Walking through my front door, I saw everything differently now. This wasn't our home anymore. It was mine, my money, my vision, my work. Richard had contributed exactly nothing except the occasional opinion and his signature on documents I'd put in front of him. I poured myself 3 fingers of the 18-year-old Macallan Richard had saved for special occasions. This felt pretty special to me. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Feeling a bit better today. Doctor says you shouldn't worry about visiting tonight. Rest up, darling. Love you too, I texted back. Then, to the empty kitchen, I muttered, you lying, cheating, murderous bastard. The whiskey burned going down, but not nearly as much as the betrayal. I spent the next hour walking through my house, mentally cataloging everything Richard might have access to. The good news was that most of my assets were in my name, only a legacy of my paranoid early days in business. The bad news was that Colorado was a common property state, and 5 years of marriage meant Richard had legitimate claims to quite a lot. But only if I died intestate, and only if I didn't fight back. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. If Richard thought he was dealing with some naive housewife, he was about to get educated. I didn't build a $37 million empire by being stupid or trusting. First stop, Margaret Winters, the divorce attorney who'd helped my friend Helen take her cheating ex-husband to the cleaners. 2 years ago, Margaret had a reputation for being ruthless, expensive, and worth every penny. Mrs. Thompson, Margaret's secretary, said when I called. I'm afraid Margaret is booked solid this week. Tell her it's an emergency consultation regarding a case worth $37 million. If she can see me tonight, I'll pay her double her usual rate. 5 minutes later, I had an appointment for 80 single quotes clock. Next, I called my accountant, James Morrison. James had been handling my books for 12 years and knew where every penny was invested. James, I need you to freeze all joint accounts immediately and transfer everything to accounts Richard doesn't have access to. Maggie, what's going on? Is everything all right? Let's just say I'm about to get divorced and I want to make sure I keep what's mine. I'll need documentation for something that dramatic. You'll have it by tomorrow. For now, just freeze everything. Richard's in the hospital and won't notice for a few days. There was a pause. Consider it done. My third call was to Sarah Collins. I'd gotten her personal number before leaving the hospital. I've been thinking about what you said. I told her about them underestimating me. I want to know exactly what they're planning and when. I can listen when they talk. But Mrs. Thompson, if they realize I'm helping you, they won't. And Sarah, I interrupted gently. When this is over, when I've dealt with them, I want to offer you something better than working in that hospital. What do you mean? I mean, I'm about to have several properties that need managing, and I suspect I'm going to need someone I can trust completely. Another pause. What kind of salary are we talking about? I smiled, feeling like my old self for the first time in days. The kind that means your son never has to worry about college tuition. By the time I left for my appointment with Margaret Winters, I had a plan forming. It wasn't complete yet, but it was a start. Richard and his little girlfriend thought they were going to steal my life. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Margaret Winters looked exactly like what you'd want in a divorce attorney, sharp, well-dressed, and capable of cutting a man's assets in half with surgical precision. Her office was decorated in what I like to call intimidating success, all dark wood and legal diplomas. Tell me everything, she said, after I'd explained the basics. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard, the fake medical crisis, the plan to transfer my assets. Margaret took notes in neat handwriting and asked pointed questions about my business structure and our financial arrangements. The good news, she said when I finished, is that they haven't actually done anything illegal yet. The bad news is that they're probably going to try very soon. How do we stop them? I asked. We get ahead of them, she said. File for divorce before they can transfer anything. Expose the medical fraud. Then she smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. And we make sure that when this is over, your husband wishes he'd never been born. I like the sound of that. It won't be cheap, and it won't be quick. Are you prepared for a fight? I thought about Richard's voice as he planned my murder. About Sophia talking about my house in Malibu as if it were already hers. About 5 years of marriage that had apparently meant nothing to him. Margaret, I said. I've been building things and tearing them down for 40 years. I'm very prepared for a fight. We spent the next 2 hours planning my legal strategy. By the time I left her office, I felt like myself again, the woman who'd taken a small inheritance and turned it into an empire. The woman who'd never lost a business negotiation, because she was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Richard and Sophia were about to learn that they'd picked the wrong target. But first, I needed to know exactly what they were planning. And for that, I needed Sarah Collins to be my eyes and ears in that hospital room. What I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after a good night's sleep, and a solid plan for revenge. I'd always been a morning person, but today I felt particularly energetic. There's something invigorating about discovering your husband is trying to kill you, and deciding to destroy him first. I dressed carefully in my navy Armani suit, the one that made me look like I could buy and sell anyone in the room because, honestly, I probably could. The courthouse wouldn't open for 3 hours, but I wanted to be ready. My phone rang just as I was finishing my coffee. Sarah Collins, Mrs. Thompson. They moved up their timeline. Sophia is bringing the lawyer today at 2 o'clock. My blood chilled. Today, you're sure? I heard them talking this morning. Richard seems nervous that you might get suspicious if he stays in the hospital much longer. He wants to sign everything and then have his miraculous recovery tomorrow. I checked my watch. It was 9:30. I had 4.5 hours to beat them to the punch. Sarah, I need you to delay them somehow just for a few hours. How am I supposed to do that? I don't know. Medical emergency, missing paperwork. You're a nurse, be creative. There was a pause. Mrs. Thompson, what if they find out I'm helping you? They won't, and even if they do, you'll be working for me by the end of the week. Just trust me. I hung up and called Margaret Winters. We need to file the divorce papers this morning, I told her. They're trying to transfer the assets today. I'll meet you at the courthouse in an hour. Everything's ready. Next, I called James Morrison. I need you to document every asset transfer they've attempted and send it to my attorney immediately. Already done. And Maggie, you're going to want to see this. They tried to transfer the Cherry Hills house last week, but it failed because of the trust structure you set up in 2019. I'd forgotten about that trust. I'd created it for tax purposes, but apparently it was about to save my financial life. So they can't touch the house? Not without your signature on about 15 different documents, and even then, it would take months to process. For the first time in 24 hours, I smiled genuinely. James, remind me to give you a bonus. The Denver County Courthouse was exactly as intimidating as it was supposed to be. Marble columns, echoing halls, and serious faces everywhere. Margaret met me at the entrance with a briefcase full of documents and the expression of a woman who lived for moments like this, ready to ruin your husband's day. She asked. I've been ready for 5 years, I said. I just didn't know it. Filing for divorce turned out to be remarkably anticlimactic. Lots of paperwork, some official stamps, and suddenly you're legally separated from someone you've shared a bed with for 5 years. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, processed everything with professional efficiency. These will be served this afternoon, Margaret told me as we walked back to our cars. Your husband won't be able to transfer any assets after that without court approval. What about the medical fraud? I asked. I've contacted the district attorney's office. They're very interested in hearing about a fake medical emergency being used to commit financial fraud. We were interrupted by my phone ringing. Sarah Collins, sounding panicked. Mrs. Thompson, they're here early. The lawyer arrived at noon and they're in Richard's room right now. What kind of papers do they have? I couldn't see clearly, but it's a thick stack. And Mrs. Thompson. Richard is out of bed, walking around. He's not even pretending to be sick anymore. I felt a surge of fury so strong it nearly knocked me over. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Can you get close enough to take photos of the documents? I think so. But what if they catch me? They won't. And Sarah, I said softly, whatever happens, keep yourself safe. Don't take any risks. After hanging up, I turned to Margaret. They're signing the papers right now. She gave a sharp nod. Then it's a good thing we filed first. Those documents will be invalid the moment they're served with the divorce papers. When will that happen? I asked. Margaret checked her watch. The process server should be at the hospital within the hour. I spent the next 45 minutes pacing the courthouse parking lot, checking my phone every 30 seconds. When it finally rang, I nearly dropped it. Mrs. Thompson. A man's voice said, "This is Tom Bradley. I'm the process server. I just delivered the divorce documents to your husband at Denver General Hospital." How did he react? I asked. Tom chuckled. "Well, ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone turn that particular shade of purple before." He started screaming about some woman named Sophia, saying this was going to ruin everything. "Was there a young blonde woman in the room?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "She went white as a sheet and ran out of there like her hair was on fire. Left behind a whole stack of legal documents, too." A deep, almost spiritual satisfaction washed over me. "Thank you, Tom," I said. "You've made my day." My phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah. "You need to see this. Coming to meet you. Richard is losing his mind." 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into the coffee shop across from the courthouse, looking like she'd just witnessed a car crash. She slid into the booth across from me and pulled out her phone. "I got photos of the documents before Sophia dropped them," she said, showing me her screen. "Mrs. Thompson, they weren't just trying to steal your money." I leaned in and looked at the images. Legal documents transferring ownership of my properties. Business incorporation papers for something called Thompson Holdings, with Richard and Sophia listed as the only officers, and at the bottom of the stack, something that made my blood run cold, a will. My will. It left everything to my beloved husband, Richard. In the event of my tragic suicide due to overwhelming grief, they already wrote my suicide note. I whispered. Sarah nodded grimly. "And Mrs. Thompson?" I overheard them talking about the timeline. "They were planning to complete their plan this weekend." "This weekend?" I repeated. "They were going to kill me this weekend." I stared at the photos, my forged signature. The fake suicide note written in handwriting close enough to fool anyone who didn't know me well. "Sarah," I said finally, steadying my voice, "I think it's time we called the police." But before I could even reach for my phone, it started ringing again. "Richard." I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "You," he snarled. "You conniving, suspicious. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I have some idea," I said calmly. "Though I'm curious to hear your perspective. 5 years of marriage, and this is how you repay me?" He hissed, "Having me served with divorce papers while I'm fighting for my life in the hospital?" "Fighting for your life?" I repeated, almost laughing. "Richard, honey, I saw you walking around that room this afternoon. Unless cardiac patients have made miraculous medical advances overnight." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Oh, and Richard?" I added sweetly. "You might want to let Sophia know that forging someone's signature is a federal crime. The FBI takes that very seriously." I hung up and turned to Sarah, who was staring at me with wide eyes and something close to awe. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," I said, "we make sure they pay for what they tried to do. And then we build something better from the ashes of their stupidity." But I had no idea Richard and Sophia had one more surprise waiting for me. And this one would change everything. The detective assigned to my case was a woman named Elena Rodriguez, no nonsense, mid-40s. The kind of cop who looked like she'd seen every brand of human stupidity and wasn't impressed by any of it. We met at the downtown precinct Thursday morning, and I brought everything: the photos of the forged documents, recordings of Richard's threatening calls, and a full timeline of their fraud. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Rodriguez said after reviewing everything, "this is one of the more elaborate financial fraud schemes I've ever seen. The fake medical emergency, the forged documents, the planned murder disguised as suicide. Your husband and his girlfriend weren't planning a simple theft. They were planning the perfect crime." I swallowed hard. "How close did they come to pulling it off?" "Closer than you want to know," she said. "If you hadn't overheard that conversation, if you hadn't filed for divorce when you did." She paused, shrugging slightly. "Let's just say we'd probably be investigating your death instead of their crimes." The thought sent a chill down my spine. "What happens next?" I asked quietly. "We arrest them. The evidence you've provided is more than enough for charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your husband will be taken into custody this afternoon. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt hollow. 5 years of marriage, and it had come to this. My phone rang as I was leaving the police station. It was Sarah Collins, double quotes Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice sounding lighter than it had in days. I have news. Good news, I think I could use some, I said with a weak smile. The hospital administration is conducting a full investigation into Richard's fake medical records. They're also reviewing Dr. Martinez's involvement, she paused, then added. And they've offered me a promotion, head nurse in the cardiac unit. Sarah, that's wonderful. I said, it gets better, she continued. Because I was the one who exposed the fraud. They're giving me a commendation and a significant raise. But Mrs. Thompson, I still want to take that job you offered. Managing your properties sounds a lot more interesting than hospital politics. I smiled for what felt like the first time in days. Consider it yours. We'll start with the Denver properties and see how it goes. That afternoon, I stood at my living room window as two police cars pulled into my driveway. They weren't there for me, they were there to search for evidence of Richard's crimes. Detective Rodriguez had obtained a warrant to seize any documents related to the fraud scheme. It was surreal watching strangers catalog the contents of my home office, bagging papers, photographing everything. This was the office where Richard and I had planned our investments, dreamed about retirement, where I'd built my empire one property at a time. Now, it was a crime scene, Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez called out, emerging from the office carrying a laptop I'd never seen before. We found this hidden in your husband's desk. It contained some interesting correspondence. She turned the screen toward me, emails between Richard and Sophia dating back 18 months, long before his supposed medical emergency. Long before I had any idea my marriage was falling apart. The emails told a story worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they'd been plotting to destroy my life piece by piece. Richard had been sharing confidential information about my business deals, helping Sophia figure out the best ways to attack my assets. They'd researched my daily routines, my favorite restaurants, even my medical history. They've been planning this for a year and a half, I said quietly, scrolling through message after message. At least, and Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez said, there's something else you need to see. She opened a folder labeled insurance policies. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, life insurance policies on me, taken out 6 months ago. With Richard listed as the sole beneficiary, 3 different policies, 3 different companies, totaling $12 million. I never signed these, I said, staring at the signatures. They were forgeries but good ones, we figured as much, the detective replied. Your husband was very thorough in planning your murder. That evening, I sat alone in my house, truly alone for the first time in 5 years, trying to process everything that had happened. Richard was in jail awaiting arraignment. Sophia had been arrested at her apartment, where police found more forged documents and cash Richard had been embezzling from our joint accounts for months. My marriage was over. My trust in other people shattered, but surprisingly, I wasn't devastated. I was angry, furious actually. And there's nothing more dangerous than a rich woman with good lawyers and a taste for revenge. My phone rang again. Margaret Winters, I have news about the asset investigation, she said. It's worse than we thought, but also better. How can it be both? I asked. It's worse because Richard has been systematically stealing from you for 2 years. Small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alerts, Margaret said. But it adds up to nearly $400,000. My jaw dropped. $400,000? But it's better, she continued, because we can trace every penny. And since he did it electronically, we have perfect documentation. He's going to prison for a very long time. What about Sophia? I asked. She's facing charges for conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft. The forged signatures alone will get her 5 to 10 years. After hanging up, I poured myself another glass of Macallan and walked out onto my deck. The October evening was crisp, and I could see the lights of Denver sprawling below my property. Somewhere out there, Richard was sitting in a jail cell, probably still trying to figure out how his perfect crime had fallen apart so quickly. I thought about Sarah Collins, who'd risked her career to help a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. I thought about Margaret Winters, who dropped everything to help me fight back. And I thought about Detective Rodriguez, who treated this case with the seriousness it deserved. Good people. Honest people. People I could actually trust. Maybe losing Richard wasn't the disaster I'd thought it was. Maybe it was an opportunity to build something better. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. I'll make you pay for this. Sophia, apparently out on bail and feeling bold. I smiled and forwarded the message straight to Detective Rodriguez. Then I typed back, looking forward to it. By the way, threatening a witness is another felony. See you in court. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez said, "We'll have officers at your house within 10 minutes. And I'm putting a rush on revoking Sophia's bail. Thank you, Detective. Thank you for forwarding that message. Some criminals just can't help making our jobs easier." As I waited for the police to arrive, I realized something important. For the first time in 5 years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what would make Richard happy, or keep the peace, or maintain some illusion of a perfect marriage. And what I wanted was justice. Complete, thorough, devastating justice. They'd picked the wrong woman to cross, and they were about to find out exactly how expensive that mistake was going to be. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse watching my husband of 5 years get sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Richard had aged considerably since his arrest. His once silver hair was now completely white, and the confident businessman I'd married had been replaced by a man who looked small, defeated, and utterly broken in his orange jumpsuit. Sophia got 8 years, and watching her led away in handcuffs felt better than I care to admit. The young woman who'd thought she could steal my life was about to find out what life behind bars was really like, but the real satisfaction came from what I'd built in the aftermath of their attempted destruction. Thompson Properties has acquired 16 new buildings in the last 6 months. Sarah Collins reported during our weekly meeting. She'd taken to property management like she was born for it. Her years in the hospital had given her incredible skills with difficult people and complex logistics. 16? I raised an eyebrow. I thought we were being conservative. Sarah grinned. She'd changed so much since leaving the hospital. Gone were the tired scrubs and weary expression, replaced by sharp business attire and the confidence of someone doing what she loved. "We were conservative," she said. But when word got out that Richard Thompson was a fraud, who'd been embezzling from his wife's business, 3 of his former clients came to us with properties they'd been planning to sell to him. Turns out he'd been making promises he couldn't keep, and the property values were below market. Everyone just wanted to get rid of them quickly and quietly. We got the entire Harbor District portfolio for 60% of its assessed value. I smiled. Richard's criminal behavior had actually been good for business. His former clients were so desperate to distance themselves from the scandal that they were practically giving properties away. "What about the Malibu house?" I asked. "Sold yesterday," Sarah said. Final price was $3.840,000 above asking. Apparently, houses with dark histories sell surprisingly well in California. The Malibu house I'd once bought as an anniversary gift, the one Richard and Sophia had planned to move into after my murder, had just sold. The profit from that sale was now funding my expansion into the California market. There was something poetic about that. "Any word from our mutual friend in prison?" I asked. Sarah's expression darkened. "Richard called my office yesterday. A collect call from the federal penitentiary. He wanted to know if I'd consider visiting him." I raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell him?" I told him that threatening to kill my employer's wife makes me pretty uninterested in social visits, she said dryly. Over the past 6 months, I'd learned something interesting about myself. I was far better at business when I wasn't constantly worried about someone else's feelings. Without Richard questioning every decision, second-guessing every investment, or taking credit for my success, my productivity had tripled. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Margaret Winters had been ruthless in protecting my assets. And since Richard had talked me out of signing a prenup 5 years earlier, his plan had completely backfired. The criminal charges and documented fraud meant he left the marriage with absolutely nothing, less than nothing actually, since he still owed $400,000 in restitution. "Mrs. Thompson?" Sarah's assistant, David, knocked on my office door. "Detective Rodriguez is here to see you." Detective Elena Rodriguez had become something of a friend over the past few months. She'd kept me updated on every step of the case and helped me understand just how deep Richard and Sophia's crimes went. "Elena," I said, standing to greet her. "Please tell me you have good news." "I have great news," she said with a smile. "We found the rest of the money." For months, investigators had been tracking down hidden assets Richard had tucked away in different accounts. The $400,000 we'd originally uncovered was just the beginning. "How much more?" I asked. $800,000, she said. "Hidden in cryptocurrency and offshore accounts." Richard was more sophisticated than we initially realized. I sank into my chair. "So he stole over $1 million from me in 3 years?" "Yes," Elena said, "but it gets better. All of it's been recovered and it's being returned to you with interest." The irony hit me hard. Richard's theft had actually ended up making me richer once all the interest and recovered investments were accounted for. "There's something else," Elena continued. Sophia is trying to make a deal with the prosecutor. What kind of deal? She's claiming Richard planned to kill her too after the insurance payout and asset transfers were complete. She says she has proof he'd already started researching how to stage her accidental death. A cold chill ran through me. Do you believe her? Actually, yes. We found search history on his laptop for untraceable poisons and ways to fake accidental drownings. Sophia may have thought she was his partner, but she was probably just another victim in a long-term plan. That evening, I sat alone in my home office, the same office where Richard had once planned my murder, and reviewed everything that had happened over the past year. The numbers told a story all on their own. Thompson Properties was now worth $48 million, a 30% increase since the divorce. Removing Richard had been like cutting out a tumor. Everything worked better without his interference. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Thompson? A woman's voice said, soft but steady with a faint accent. My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm calling from London, yes? I said cautiously. How can I help you? I saw the news about your husband, his arrest, the fraud, the attempted murder. Her voice wavered. I'm calling because I believe Richard Thompson tried to kill my sister 15 years ago. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? My sister Emma was married to a man named Richard Thompson in Phoenix in 2009. He was a financial advisor back then. She died in what was ruled a suicide, but our family never believed it. And when I saw your husband's photo in the news, my hands started shaking. Catherine, I whispered, gripping the phone tighter. Are you saying my husband was married before? I'm saying he murdered my sister for her inheritance and got away with it. And if you hadn't caught him, you would have been next. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence that followed. How do you know it's the same man? Because I've been tracking him for 15 years, Catherine said. The photo in the Denver Post is definitely him. He looks older, but it's him. She paused, her voice trembling. Mrs. Thompson, your husband is a serial killer. The conversation with Catherine lasted for over an hour. She described Richard as a calculated predator, a man who hunted wealthy women, married them quickly, and then killed them for their money. Emma Walsh, Catherine's sister, had been his first known victim. But Catherine was sure there were more. I've hired private investigators over the years, she said, her voice steady but heavy with pain. He was always too careful, too clever. Until now. What changed? I asked. You, Catherine said simply. You caught him. You survived. And now we have evidence, documentation, proof of how he operated. Mrs. Thompson, would you be willing to help me get justice for my sister? I looked around my office, the business I'd rebuilt from the ashes of Richard's betrayal, the life I'd fought to reclaim. Catherine, I said quietly, I'd be honored to help you destroy him. What I would soon learn about Richard's past would change everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married, and it would lead to one final confrontation that would decide whether true justice would ever be served. The investigation into Richard's past lasted 3 months and revealed a horrifying pattern that stretched over 2 decades. Catherine Walsh had been right. Emma Walsh, Emma Thompson, after she married him, was his first known victim, but she wasn't the last. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with law enforcement across 5 states. What they uncovered was chilling. Richard had used different names, different backstories, different professions, but his pattern never changed. He'd find a successful, wealthy woman, marry her quickly, gain access to her assets, and then kill her in a way that looked like suicide or an accident. We've identified 6 victims over the last 20 years. Elena told me during a meeting at the district attorney's office. She laid out the files one by one. Emma Walsh in Phoenix, 2009, Linda Martinez in San Antonio. 2011, Carol Stevens in Austin. 2013, Jennifer Burke in Oklahoma City. 2016, Michelle Davis in Kansas City. 2018, and you, Mrs. Thompson, you were supposed to be number 7 in Denver. 2024, I stared at the photographs spread across the conference table. All women, all smiling, successful, confident, happy in their final pictures. They all looked like me. How did he get away with it for so long? I asked. He was smart, Elena said. He never stayed in one state twice. He adjusted his approach each time, learned from mistakes, and he was patient. He'd spend years researching his next target before even meeting her. Research? I repeated, horrified. Elena nodded and slid a thick folder toward me. We found his planning documents in a storage unit. He'd been tracking you for 5 years before you ever met him. He studied your business, your travel habits, your social circle. He knew more about you than most of your friends did. I felt sick. 5 years of being watched, analyzed, prepared for, like I was nothing more than a business acquisition. How did he choose his victims? I asked quietly. Successful women in their 50s or 60s, Elena said. usually divorced or widowed, financially independent with few close family ties. Women who were lonely enough to fall for a charming man, but too proud to admit they needed help. That described me perfectly when I met Richard 5 years ago. I'd been 59, recently divorced, building my real estate business but feeling isolated and vulnerable. Richard had seemed like a dream come true, a successful businessman who shared my passions and encouraged my ambitions. Now I realized he'd been playing a role all along, becoming exactly what I wanted to see. What happens now? I asked. The families of his other victims are pushing to reopen their cases, Elena said. With the evidence we've gathered from yours, we can file murder charges for at least 3 of the deaths. Will that be enough to keep him behind bars? Elena's expression hardened. If we can prove even one more murder, Mrs. Thompson, your ex-husband will never see the outside of a prison cell again. That afternoon, I met Catherine in person for the first time. She had flown in from London to coordinate with investigators. A sharp, poised woman in her 50s. She carried the same quiet determination I saw in my own reflection. Thank you for doing this, she said as we sat down over coffee. Emma was my older sister, my best friend. She was brilliant and kind, and she deserved so much better than what he did to her. What was she like? I asked softly. Catherine smiled sadly. A lot like you, actually. Strong, independent, built her business from nothing. She was an architect specialized in sustainable housing. She would have loved what you've done with your properties. We spent 2 hours reviewing Emma's case file. The similarities between her story and mine were terrifying: the whirlwind romance, the quick marriage, the gradual isolation from family and friends, and finally, the staged suicide that left Richard as the sole heir to her estate. The difference, Catherine said, her eyes glistening, is that Emma trusted him completely. She never suspected a thing, at least not until it was too late. How do you know that? I asked. Because she called me the night before she died, Catherine said softly. Emma told me Richard had been acting strange. He was pressuring her to sign some documents, and she said she was thinking about getting a second opinion from a lawyer. Catherine's voice cracked. She never got the chance. That evening, I received a call that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, this is Lieutenant Sarah Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the voice on the line said. Your ex-husband would like to meet with you. Richard wants to see me? I asked, startled. Yes, ma'am. He claims he has information about additional crimes, information he's only willing to share with you. I was silent for a long moment. What kind of information? He won't say, Morrison replied. But Mrs. Thompson, you should know he's been placed in protective custody. Word has gotten around about what he did. Inmates don't take kindly to men who murder women. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Richard Thompson in a federal prison visiting room. He looked awful thin, pale and twitchy, a nervousness I'd never seen before. The confident, arrogant man who'd tried to kill me was gone. What sat across from me was someone small, frightened, and hollow. Hello, Maggie, he said quietly. Richard, we stared at each other across the cold metal table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. I suppose you're here to gloat, actually. I'm here because you said you had information about other crimes. His expression shifted, turning sharp and calculating again. I do, he said slowly. But I want something in exchange. I leaned back. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate. I think I am, he said. The information I have could solve several cold cases, bring closure to families who've been waiting for answers. That has to be worth something. I folded my arms. What do you want? He hesitated. A transfer to a minimum security facility. Better protection from the other inmates. And he swallowed hard. I want you to know that I never meant for it to go as far as it did with you. I almost laughed at the audacity. You planned to murder me for my money, Richard. How much further could it have gone? I mean, he looked down at his hands. I never planned to hurt you personally. It wasn't personal. You wrote my suicide note, I said coldly. You researched untraceable poisons. How was that not personal? He shifted uncomfortably. The others were different. You were different. He paused. I actually cared about you, enough to kill me for $37 million? I said, enough to feel bad about it afterward? The conversation was surreal. My ex-husband, a serial killer, was trying to convince me that attempted murder was, in some twisted way, a sign of affection. Tell me about the other women, I said finally. What do you want to know? Everything. How you chose them. How you killed them. Where the bodies are buried. For the next 2 hours, Richard talked. He confessed to details that solved 6 murders spanning 15 years. His tone was detached, businesslike, as if he were describing a real estate deal instead of human lives. When he finally stopped, I asked, why are you telling me this now? He looked tired. Because I'm never getting out of here anyway. And because He hesitated, and for the first time, there was something almost human in his eyes. Because maybe if I help solve these cases, it'll mean something. Maybe it'll count for something, it won't bring them back, I said quietly. No, he admitted. But maybe it'll give their families answers. I stood up to leave, then turned back. Richard, did you ever love me? Even a little? He was silent for a long time. Then, softly, he said, I don't think I'm capable of love, Maggie. I think that's the problem. As I walked out of that prison, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not forgiveness, never that. But pity for a man so completely broken that the only way he could connect with anyone was by destroying them. 3 weeks later, new murder charges were filed. Richard pleaded guilty to 6 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Catherine Walsh called me the day the plea was finalized. It's over, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. After 15 years, Emma finally has justice. How do you feel? I asked, exhausted, relieved, grateful, and angry that it took so long. I understand, I said softly. Mrs. Thompson, she continued, I want you to know something. What you did catching him, stopping him, it saved other women's lives. He would have kept killing if I hadn't been strong enough to fight back. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I stood in the conference room of Thompson Properties, looking out over the Denver skyline. The company had grown to 47 employees and managed over $83 million in properties. Sarah Collins knocked on my door. Mrs. Thompson, the new acquisitions team is here for the meeting. I'd been expanding fast, and not just in Denver. We now had offices in Phoenix, Austin, and Oklahoma City, the same cities where Richard had murdered women years ago. In each location, I'd partnered with organizations that help women rebuild their lives after trauma. And Sarah, I said with a small smile, I've told you 100 times, call me Maggie, she grinned. Maggie, there's something else. My son Jake wants to thank you personally for his college fund. Jake Collins was 15 now, accepted into an advanced engineering program that would eventually lead to MIT. The fund I'd set up for him was part of a foundation I'd created to support the children of Richard's victims. Tell Jake he earned it with his grades, I said. I will. And Maggie, thank you for everything. That evening, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rodriguez. Richard Thompson died in prison today. Apparent heart attack. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. Relief, mostly. And a strange, heavy sense of closure. Richard was gone. The women he'd killed finally had justice. The families he'd shattered finally had answers. And somehow, I had built something meaningful out of the wreckage he'd left behind. My phone rang. It was Catherine Walsh, calling from London. I heard the news, she said softly. How are you feeling? Like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder, I said. Like Emma can finally rest. What will you do now? Live, I said. Really live for the first time in 15 years. After hanging up, I walked slowly through my house. My house in my name. Bought with my money. Decorated with my choices for the first time in 5 years. Every decision in my life was truly mine. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was absolutely perfect. I'd survived a serial killer's attempt to murder me, rebuild my life, expanded my business, and helped bring justice to 6 murdered women. At 64, I was stronger, more successful, and more authentically me than I had ever been. Richard had tried to steal my life, but instead, he'd forced me to truly find it. As I watched the lights of Denver twinkle below, I realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't just surviving his betrayal, it was thriving in spite of it. He'd bet everything on my death. I'd bet everything on my life. And I won. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something hard, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.